Hi, today I'm going to be showing you through the sentiment analysis dashboard and some of the software that sits behind it. This is a follow-on video from the previous video of myself calling the virtual agent, so if you haven't watched that yet, please do so. What we're seeing here is the DynamoDB. This is the database which holds all of the sentiment scores for every call which is made to the virtual agent. As you can see here, this is not broken down necessarily into calls. Only 2 calls were made in the previous video, and yet there are 11 database entries. The reason for this is because the sentiment analysis tool actually breaks down each phrase into its own little category and applies the sentiment to that, so that you can end up with multiple sentiments across a call and get a good idea for how the flow of the call went. There are 3 data items which the DynamoDB holds. This is the sentiment score, the raw sentiment score, the date time, and the sentiment label itself. So, just to go through some of this data in a little bit more detail, what you can see here is you've got a negative score here, which was the first phrase spoken, but you can see that this wasn't very negative as it has a score of 0.51, whereas something here, this phrase spoken just 11 seconds later, this has a neutral score of 0.999. So this means that this was a very neutral statement. There was almost no sentiment at all whatsoever in it. And then the same again here. You've got a negative score, however this one was 0.84. So as you can see, this was more negative than the previous negative item. Next we'll be moving on to Amazon Connect. Now Amazon Connect is the AWS software which actually allows you to create the virtual agents and the flows, so what kind of conversation you'd be having with the virtual agent. What we can do here is start, and then we get the agent to play a prompt. This is just simple text-to-speech where we say welcome to the call center bot. Then we get the customer input, of course some text-to-speech first so that the customer knows exactly what's happening. But then what we do is we call the Amazon Lex intents, which is how the virtual agent actually detects what category the customer wants to go into. So here we have 2 intents. We have change address intent and unsubscribe. Come out of that. Then what we have is several different options, which is where Connect really shines, where you, depending on what the customer's response is, what kind of category they want to go down, you can actually play completely separate. You can create almost completely separate flows. So for example here, if we want to change address, after the customer has been asked the data by the virtual agent, such as their address and postcode, their house number and postcode, sorry, then it will say, thank you, you've changed your address. And then if you'd like to unsubscribe from the service, it of course says, we're sorry to see you go, you've now been unsubscribed, and then disconnects. And there's a prompt if there are any errors, of course. Then we move over to Amazon Lex. So this is what I was referring to about customer options. So if the customer would like to unsubscribe, they can say several phrases which have been defined here, such as unsubscribe, I'd like to leave, and can I unsubscribe from your service? These would just be continually added to as the customer base grew and the product got older. Then the slots are what the virtual agent will be asking the customer, so that in case it has any data it needs to process the claim, which of course it would if the customer wanted to unsubscribe. They would need to know some identifying information. So here it asks for the first name, last name, and the date of birth, and these use specific types which are defaults on Amazon. The most important thing for the sentiment analysis tool though is this here, this Lambda initialization. Now the Lambda function is called, and this is what actually processes the data and kind of sends it to the database, but we'll be looking at this in a minute. Right, next what we're going to be doing is going over to the, I should mention, the sentiment analysis tool is actually built into Lex. When you create a Lex service, it asks whether you would like inbuilt sentiment analysis. So that's how the actual sentiment analysis is occurring. It's a service provided by AWS. Next we move on to the Lambda function. This is the piece of code which actually takes the sentiment from the AWS selects the virtual agent and then processes it and sends it to a place where it can actually be used, which in this case is of course our DynamoDB. So what this does, detects the sentiment, it then assigns some variables so that everything is formatted correctly when it enters the database, and then we add the item into the database using this here. That's pretty much all there is to the AWS flows and the virtual agent, etc. So now we'll be looking at the sentiment analysis dashboard itself. So what you see here, it's a fairly simple dashboard. All the information you need is on the home page. So the main reason for someone coming to this dashboard would of course to be look at the sentiment scores for various time ranges. So it's currently set to all time. So as you can see, there's been 12 negatives, 24 neutrals, and 3 positives. That just looks at all the records in the database, and it shows it in a nice pie chart here. Then if we go on today, what we get is all the sentiment scores which we were just looking at in the DynamoDB, the 11 of them, 3 negatives, 8 neutrals. And then if we go on week, that's the exact same because there haven't been any other calls made this week. And then month is almost identical. And then of course we also display how many happy customers there have been in the past, how many records with a positive sentiment count right there. So that's easy to see. And then this is just a simple FAQ page, which would of course be expanded as the site grew in user base. So this just answers some questions such as how's the data collected and how's it kept secure, just to put anyone's mind at ease. So that is everything. That is the whole system. I hope that you've enjoyed watching. Thank you very much.